a short introduction, I'm Jeffrey. I work at a small startup for most of the last year. I've been the only full-stack developer. So this talk is sort of about getting a bit of feedback or critique on the API that I've been working on, and just sort of seeing what you think.
Sweet.
Some overall goals is whether the architecture that's sort of emerging with this API is something that you all have seen like scaled up at larger companies in your experience, whether it's something that might scale well in the future, or whether there's any like serious red flags that are like, I haven't seen this, I'm not sure if this is the right way of doing it. Cool. And just as a little bit more of a background, that being, maybe you all have experienced this, but being the only programmer at our company, it can be a little bit of an echo chamber, sort of doing your own thing for a while. You can get off into left field and end up with something that's hasn't been like.
Are we gonna die with the door?
No,
I think we should. Yeah.
It's nice out, but yeah, go ahead and shut that down. Edward, watch out for the lock there. Edward, what? Open the door a little bit. See that left one, there's a little thing sticking out?
Oh.
There you go. Thank you, sir. Building's like 200 years old, so keep it like that. I got you. I know how the store works. We go way back. Oh, okay.
So some high-level facts. We're using Express on Node, hosting on Heroku, and storing our data on Elasticsearch. And some of the main goals of the API were that it is modular, so having reusable parts of code that you can share among different endpoints to achieve common tasks, and enforced naming structure, because we have some endpoints right now, but we anticipate that API is going to grow and support future types of content. And so the endpoints that will exist to access and edit that future content need to have similar naming structures for their endpoints without having all the maintenance involved with them. It should just be default, similar patterns. And if we want to edit, then changing that pattern in one place as well. It's a RESTful API. So the main theme is that we operate on a basis of resources, or like a type of content. The most obvious one being the user's resource. So anyone that has an account in Elasticsearch, who has signed up for an account with our product, they have an entry in Elasticsearch, and that's stored in something called the user's resource thematically. There's also, since we have a bit of an online marketplace that's developing, so the content that a user can create in that marketplace is something called a web app, basically a collection of images, a description, a title, some other fields, and we call that a web app. It's stored in Elasticsearch as well, and part of the web app's resource. And the main idea is that each of these resources need to have a collection, so 6 basic CRUD endpoints configured for them, 3 different types of endpoints to get, suggest content, suggest a user, get a user by their ID, get all of the standard CRUD endpoints along with posting and patching and deleting. And we want to have a rigid naming structure for these endpoints.
Real quick, I want to give them a little background colors. I know that it took me a minute to catch up with where we were. This started out from a conversation we were having the last couple of years, Jeffrey, where he's asking for opinions about how he's building certain things. And I encouraged him to put this talk together to kind of explain to the group real quick and give kind of a group feedback sort of thing. One of the benefits that we can have in these meetups is the opportunity to talk to your peers, say, hey, I'm doing this thing, what do you think? Especially in a smaller company like Jeffrey's Scholar. It's easy. You only remote worker, right? First of all, and you're basically an engineer one on this particular task.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. There's no goals.
exactly. So he's giving background right now, and at the end we'll have a little bit of conversation. So we're soliciting opinions.
whenever I looked online to see how Express was being used, like boilerplate code, other applications, I always saw the route handler be written out manually. Like for any of the endpoints that people wanted to have on their API, they would just be like a page of like 10, 12 more. Maybe they're split up between files, but they're always written out explicitly. And in my opinion, that was a problem because all of our resources needed the same endpoints. There was always the same 6. Maybe they had like a couple added for like specific like logging or like verifying email, some of these weird one-off. But the same 6 that you see on the left there were identical across all resources. And if we had even more than just like 1, if we had 2, 3, 4 resources, we had like 12, and they were all being repeated. And I was a little bit confused why I never saw that abstracted out, like written in a loop at least, or in like a class or something like that across the API. But eventually the approach I took was to write a function that you give it a resource name, and it gives you in return a router, an express router, with all of those 6 defaulted onto it, just right off the bat with, as you can see, the name as part of the URL. And that way, whenever the server boots, it just creates them for you. And then with the return router, you can always add more if you want. Okay. A bigger problem that I ran into was that there was a lot of repetition in the little tiny tasks that surround the endpoints in like a real API. A lot of them need protection to make sure that the requesting user is authorized. Maybe you want to check to see if content exists on your database before like running into who knows what down the road. And so the biggest 2 issues were that we always needed to be looking at an HTTP header and getting a token and decrypting it and trying to get the user ID out of the token for like a vast majority of the endpoints. And another one was the endpoints that should only be accessed by an admin needed to have that token decrypted, get the user ID, and then hit our database to find the roles, their permissions, and then reject consistently for all the endpoints that needed this permissions check, which is like pretty darn simple functionality. And for these cases and like plenty of other ones, what I saw initially was that the route handler would take a path, like take a request and forward it into a controller method. And then all of these little business logic tasks would be like mixed into that controller method, just like because that's what the endpoint needed. So you just put them in the controller method and called it a day, which soon became a horrible kind of situation because you had a lot of repeated business logic. And it was very difficult to see the progression of all the steps that needed to happen for that endpoint. And this kind of follows in like a more general software engineering kind of perspective. You're like, if you have duplicated code, it's impossible to refactor it. You can't like look at your code base and understand the high-level checks that are happening across the entire server. And it just made it really difficult to think about what our API was doing like for each endpoint. So I kind of took the idea of express middleware, which you, as a quick background, whenever you have a router, it forwards the HTTP request to a function, but you can actually string together as many functions as you want for that route handler called middleware. So I was like, okay, why don't we, since I know there's going to be an order for all of these, why don't we take all of these little business logic steps and pull them into their own middlewares, into a different file, a function, and then when I'm configuring that router, just like specify that this is a function I want to run before the rest of the, I call them express pipelines. And so that way, the controller function got a lot smaller. All of those logical steps were in one place, and like the implementations were all like sort of shuttled into one version. And if I ever wanted to change it, you just change it in one place, and the next time you booted the server, then obviously all the endpoints that invoked that middleware reflected the changes. Okay, and so this is a much sort of a simplified version of that at work. The top half, you have a route creator or a route model, which takes the resource name and a configuration object. On the first line, it makes the router and then adds all of the CRUD endpoints. Okay. And then you can also pass middleware through the configuration object, and it drops that in, spreads it into each endpoint that it's making on line 8, 11, and 14. And I dropped out the other ones, but it's the exact same idea.
Sure.
And then when you want to go use that, so that's generic and it can be used for any resource. Then when you want to actually make a router, you instantiate, you use it, give it some configurations, and it gives you the router with all the middleware mixed in. And then, like normal, you just use it at the top level when you're starting. There are some other important parts. I don't want to get too deep into this. I'm not sure if it's like, basically we have, for each resource, we have a data access class that hits the database in identical ways for each resource, because they're all stored in the same way, and they're all accessed and updated and created in the same way. So why not just make a data model, and then like the root model, you just give it a name of the resource and it spits out a class for you that has all those methods pre-stamped for you. And we also need a controller class with methods that link this, like the actual pipeline to like an action in the database. Because if you just have lists of middleware, like where does the actual like goal of the endpoint get completed? And that's the controller method. It calls into the database through the data access method. And here's a diagram to kind of tie it all together. The green region is what the root model is giving you. It says it takes all the middleware that you care about, that you've told it to include. It sticks the controller method in between all the middlewares and calls, and then the database methods included there to actually carry out the task. And here's our sign-up method. You can see it's probably one of the most involved pipelines, because there's a lot of checks that need to happen, like checking to make sure the email's not taken, the username isn't taken. You need to go ahead and hash the password, initialize some internal fields like the number of submissions a user has, when the account was created at. My company's really small, so we only have a couple, but I'm sure there's like, for large companies, there's like, who knows, maybe 10 or 20 at least. And the very beginning, the first thing to do before all of this is check to make sure that when you're posting content, the fields in that post body are valid. Like they're the right number of fields, the right type. The email is like actually an email and not just a random string. A lot of things that the front end checks, but you can't count on the user submitting correctly if they're using the API like programmatically. And then after all this, once the user account is actually created in Elasticsearch, send an email to like verify the email. That's a piece of middleware, and also set some metadata for the server response. But overall, these gray boxes, the point is that they're identical across all endpoints. Like this check exists is the same file as what 10 other endpoints use, so that everything is consistently managed across the entire code base. And add fields, like initializing internal fields, is all done consistently. That was sort of the idea of keeping everything really tight and manageable. And these are some examples of, I think we're probably time for questions at this point, but if we want to go back and look at some of the actual code, there's some examples there. But that's the high level view.
Yeah, I like the bullet points you got there too. So to the first one, any gut reactions on like, hey man, watch out for this, or this is a bad idea? Or, as a front end engineer, I think your back end looks great.
How many are you know it all back end?
I mean, yes, but
inheritance work in the sense of how you're having to implement, because you're following a repository pattern on every resource, right? And that's gonna, even though you can abstract it to where you can easily duplicate that and generate it, it's still gonna get into this whole sense of you have still 20 files referencing that same code where I know C# what I usually do since I have the abstract class. You know, that one has all the implementation, and as long as I just say user inherits from serializable object, I already have all my database code reused. How do you handle that? Because what I got the sense of is that you're following the repository patterns where then every resource you're still gonna have to create that. Even though it's just facade on it, it's still a little repeatable.
Yeah, so you're gonna end up with like a file. You're gonna have to instantiate or call that function for all of these. Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like you're really asking like how does session management work so you don't have to continually check against the headers instead.
Not the edit, because that's the middle word, and you solve that. But I was asking more of the setting up the resources actually, the actual.
Just when it sort of boots, like when it starts up to configure all this.
Yeah. To configure all this.
So I think maybe what like the JavaScript, we have class user extends resource. We could do that.
Yeah.
And that's potentially a
You
solution.
still have to like import it.
But now we're doing.
He's just doing a functional variant.
Yeah.
It's not class based. That's
Yeah.
it's pretty typical.
No, and that's why. So then, if you're all your database repo code is living on that resource base class, right?
It's living in
the access methods at least. Yeah.
Now, have you found a way for you to be able to then structurally just be able to add a resource, inherit from this, you know, like your new Starbucks class, inherits some resource,
Yeah.
and that actually just generates all this new code for you, and you can look route for parameters. Because you're still, since you already know what you're doing on the REST routes, you should be able to figure out a way to where you just inherit from the class and it generates all this.
I feel like
You don't even
that's
have to configure it.
like that's one of the like great divides of how you code. Like what he's doing isn't necessarily like any better or worse.
No,
It's
and that's
just
why
a
I'm
different
asking.
paradigm of like how you approach things.
So that's why I'm asking about like what have you found into how you handle this? Because to be on the C# side, it just sounded like I would have handled it a little.
Like you have a
different
shortcut in
in the sense
C#.
that it just-
Yeah,
How
it's also like he's very accustomed to like class-based
Yeah.
inheritance schemes.
Right.
Like, you know,
And then to me, like I have so many abstract classes that I can just create this new resource, inherit from, and it'll automatically set up all your REST routes, all your database code, all without me even having to generate it.
I'm
It
not
just
aware of
fast.
that.
Yeah,
That sounds
just because
amazing.
it doesn't exist. JavaScript.
So that's what I was asking. I was like, did you find anything comparable on the JavaScript?
yeah, JavaScript has classes, but
No, you can ask that, you know, like I do inherit from. I'm like, all right, that's the point. It's done. And he's like, wait, what's your outside? I'm done.
right.
Yeah. Potentially, if I were using a different database solution like Mongo, there was some stuff that just Elasticsearch. So there's a lot less kind of out of the box there.
Does that have like an URM type of library you use for it?
No, not even like Mongo has.
Is that Mongo use, have you ever used like Mongoose?
I've like looked at it enviously many a time.
It's not quite nice.
I wish we had that. It's like somewhat unsupported
Until you run into a
GitHub thing, I
problem
could
with
have
Mongoose,
selected to
then you'd be like, man, I wish I wrote all this myself because I would know what was happening. Yeah, nothing jumped at me. It looked fine.
Yeah, everything that you like called out, like especially going like, hey, I don't see documentation that extracts things. It's like that's pretty much my experience with everything. Like documentation just doesn't extract or doesn't do that, and you pretty much have to recognize that you can abstract things on your own.
Right.
Everything
Yeah.
you did looked like something that I would do. I am not a server side person. So I mean, this is another like front end engineer going like, that looks like stuff I do.
Don't get me wrong, it looked great. I was just more wondering, like, because I'm not good on the JavaScript side, so that's why I was like, oh, all right, like, let me understand your approach.
Sure.
Because to me, I'm spoiled by the C#.
I have found with JavaScript that it is easier to debug the functional paradigm than it is to debug a class-based paradigm. Classes give you a lot of stuff for free. You don't necessarily like recognize that it's there unless you like realize, oh, it says extends up there. like even our tooling, like VS Code, doesn't like completely help us out in letting us know what that class provides and you know, what it hands us. So it's way easier, you know, if something goes wrong, to just be like, cool, I got a call stack. Yeah, what did I generate? What is it at this point in time?
Sure.
Sort of thing.
Potentially what I could see, like the one step that I haven't taken it would be instead of like calling a function to get a class, you could just like instead of like the user's resources, actually the first line is to call that function to get the configured. You could just start the file off by saying class users extends resource.
Sure.
That's like the only step.
Yeah.
It's the whole router, I definitely don't get that for free.
Another,
I don't think so.
I mean, I don't want to be that guy that just throws the buzzword at the problem, but it does look like a prime example for a potential GraphQL solution because your endpoints are all so similar.
Yeah.
And you're doing all your heavy lifting on the back end anyways. I say this from a huge position of naivete because I know very, very little about GraphQL at the moment. It looks like you got all this boilerplate for just, and that's one of the problems that GraphQL was built to kind of not fix but address was that got all this garbage. Every single object they have to write 4 endpoints at least. Like you found, like, that sucks. It's the same thing over and over. So you write these functions to help you. But GraphQL takes an approach of like one endpoint, just tell me what you want and give it to you. Now you have to build that implementation in the back end, but you're already doing half that work right now.
So because we had previously talked about GraphQL as like helping to route multiple, like route requests, route like business logic ideas that need multiple API hits. Because you know, for here, if you want to like someone created content, you need to like you need to post the content, you need to edit the user account to like reflect who submitted it, like add some submissions, that kind of stuff. So things that need 3 or 4, I was thinking about using GraphQL for. But you're talking about it internally within, like how does it fit inside the actual? Because I was thinking about having it as something that sits in front.
Yeah, you would replace all that routing that Express is doing. Your Express route would be routing to the GraphQL server endpoint. That's it. On your front end, you've got to run it on the client side. Just use Apollo, like everybody does. Just use Apollo, follows what it tells you to do. We're going to be happy. But it just looks like you're already kind of trying to solve that problem yourself. That wheel has already been invented. Maybe.
Yeah.
If I were you, I'd spend a weekend deep diving into Apollo in particular, because it's going to be the easiest.
How big is your API right now?
Like number of endpoints. Or what?
Yeah, like number of endpoints. Yeah.
Let's see, we have 8 on the user, 6 on 6, maybe over in mid-20s.
Okay.
The problem is we're still defining what kind of functionality we want. So it's like mid-20s, probably will double, hopefully.
Can you talk about, I take it your state to Elasticsearch? So, I mean, you said NB of Mongo. Is that just a no-go for you?
The thing is, we really wanted to use Elasticsearch for its suggest functionality. Later down the road, in our marketplace, or it's more like a content library of virtual reality content. We wanted to be able to offer like intelligent sorting and suggestion of how all that will get presented to the user. So maybe having it stored in Mongo or Mongoose and using Mongoose, and then like having Elasticsearch sit in front, but that just kind of complicates things because the storing seems to be okay right now using Elasticsearch. So
yeah, I mean,
but it would definitely simplify the accessing.
But then you have that single point of failure type of thing kicking in, and you want to maintain that as much as you can.
Yeah.
The other thing is on the client side, are you expecting your customers to insist that we have these architectures built on REST, we need REST endpoints, or is the GraphQL?
That's a really
Fortunately, that's really up to us.
It's up to you.
Yeah, it's up to us for now.
So you don't have a public facing API right now.
Yeah,
Is that an internal product right now?
Yeah,
it is.
do what
But
you want.
we want to keep it something that can be accessed publicly to like just open it up. Yeah.
So I don't even have a side project in GraphQL, but I mean, it is definitely the future. And I've done some digging And I think it's enough of the future that at least one company has figured out, get this, create the GraphQL endpoint, and then if you have to, they're building packages and libraries to give a REST wrapper.
I hate where you're going with this.
It sounds crazy, but you can kind of imagine that scenario where if you've got architectures that and existing clients, which doesn't apply to you, but just for the demo, if you got people that cannot move fast enough and they insist you don't break my REST API, and you want to go to GraphQL, you're not held back, and then you can still maintain those contracts. So it's not like you have to, it's a one-way deal. No, this particular package, I'm not even sure if I have to find it again, but they're out there and people are working on that kind of solution. So
That's something to think about for sure.
Fortunately, you're at a greenfield technology, so you don't have that issue. That's awesome. That is
Yeah.
best case scenario. Well, cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, excellent.
Thanks so much for listening.
I would definitely want to look into GraphQL. Like, if you want to spend something up, I would definitely
That seems like
want to look into it for you. Because we built our own graph interface on top of NoSQL solution. That's because we wanted a lot of graph querying aspects, but not really all the edges and all this. It was just more of what you're going into. So I definitely want to spend something on JavaScript.
Oh, and my take, I don't know if you guys would have it. It's not a graph database. You don't have to worry about that shit.
100%. They overloaded that term. Like,
It's just like the whole JavaScript thing, right? It's Java? No. Please don't even, in graph, it's not a graph. I don't think you could make it a graph database if you needed to.
It's very separate concepts.
However, that's a whole other world that's actually pretty cool too.
Yeah, it's totally cool. But talk about a different ball of wax.
Oh yeah.
awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
And if anybody has any more deep dive questions, whatever, after we're done, we always have our hangout session. If you didn't want to tell them everything was terrible in front of everybody.
Turn off the recording. Okay, now
That's right.
That's quite a bit of lag there.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
that's a bit of lag. Get connected real quick.
Yeah.
Now's a good time to grab a drink. Yes, good job. So, what you got there too is the start of a nice post, like for Medium. The way the slide deck you already had, you said right up front that you couldn't find anything. Man, right one for the next person like you that's trying to solve the same problem that you already did. I think that's an excellent Medium post.
It's a problem I've run into, and other people have done back end. It's like, yeah, it's all the same. I would love to just put a name to it, and there it is. And I don't have to worry.
So what I found happens is that when we solve these problems, especially as you get longer and longer in your career, you kind of forget that other people haven't solved them yet. And so you're like, oh yeah, I got these endpoints. I'm just gonna whatever, like I always do. Think about it until somebody asks you how to do it, and you're like, oh yeah, you haven't done that yet. Let me show you. So be the person that writes the article that somebody else will find. Like, oh, Jeffrey, you're the man who saved me weeks of work. That's so cool. Please do.
And as a bonus, if you were doing anything weird, it's less weird now because of the
So write it under a pseudonym so you can then cite yourself later.
I do have one question for the whole crowd. How do y'all handle JWT? So y'all store it, because I can read a couple articles about security, and y'all store it in local storage or cookies? JSON web cookie. For Austin. So I read a bunch of articles that say don't do it in local storage though.
Yeah, because I read an article that was kind of like that, where we like break it into two parts, like one local storage and then do another one.
Oh, I didn't
And
see
the cookie
I just saw purely like don't do local at all. Just do.
access.
Yeah, because any browser plugin can actually access local storage and then steal that, then use that as authentication to your browser.
See, to us as all of our APIs are internal, I kind of always have to double check the user objects. I always have to load your whole objects. I always have to look for permissions. So I don't really, we don't use JAWS. We just send the session ID and I'm like, all right, look, I still have to pull everything on, do security checks per action that you take. Gotta take an auto log anyway, so I don't look. But we were talking about job the other day, the job coding, and that's why this came up about. I was doing that query is not even there. Wait, break. So those people are just breaking it. Local storage, like the section that is not the secure one, and then the secure key on the just stick it on the HTTP request and stuff like build it in.
So I find the whole thing really perplexing because I assume that nothing I write on the front end is secure.
Right. That's good.
So I'm just like,
good assumption.
who cares if I don't put it in local storage? They can just replace my entire JavaScript file with whatever they want. And if the backend is still willing to hand them, a session token, they have it.
Well, the problem with JWT is it's quite literally a username and login. Like it basically gives that access to the thing. And
Kind
then
of.
it's fired.
But it's also one-way hashed so that it's not going to work. It's meaningless on its own.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
You can always encode it into the information, but it's not like people store passwords in that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know. I just been like, I've always done local storage, and I'm like, oh, everyone's saying I do cookies. Oh.
I don't see why it would be any more or less.
Yeah.
I think it's
Well, it's
with-
like a different type of security. So it's like constant scripting versus like cookies.
I guess you're really worried about plugins for the browser stealing the user's data and acting maliciously rather than
Which is
what I
not
was getting at, which was a malicious user
Yeah.
attempting to
Yeah.
that's a good point.
But it's still a security flaw. Nonetheless. How you
Sure.
deal with it. So like, how do you?
Tell your users not to download stupid crap into Chrome.
I would love to do that,
Yeah.
but first,
There's a so at some point you can't protect your users from everything. You can't hold their hand through everything. This falls under play stupid games, win stupid prizes for me. So hey, I downloaded some like HackerX Deluxe plugin and now I lost all my stuff because you suck. No, that's not on me. You did something really dumb and you paid for it. I'm sorry. We'll do our best to mitigate it. Regardless, that feels like kind of a non-issue. You can't. I don't know what they're going to do with that token. Right. And you should be expiring them pretty frequently anyways.
Well, yeah, I do that.
You start mixing in the session state inside the token. Like if you're just passing the session ID, then just let the backend handle. If you're trying to handle a lot more of the session object inside the token, then it's really when you start running into the security.
It's a purple theme.
Oh man, yeah, I went crazy with my themes. I like it.
That looks good.
Try to remember to blow this
So
up.
over black
Crazy
now.
cancer.
I need a new black. Like
Yeah,
purple is the new black.
I'm waiting. So everybody's in the dark mode. I'm waiting for light mode to come back around.
Exactly.
On that way.
I started to switch. Yeah.
This week, literally, I couldn't
Yeah.
handle dark anymore.
Can you guys see that okay, or do I need to embiggen slightly more?
I can see it.
Good enough? Okay, we can always embiggen later. So basically what I've done here, and this is really just me kind of exploring through the concepts. We had a conversation last week about using Pug and about TypeScript and about the new composition API. And I was like, man, I haven't used any of those things. Let me play with them and kind of document my journey through doing it on a very simple project, and then we'll walk through it together. So what I've done is I started with, we're here on step 0. This is just the git log dump from all my commits. With a lot of behind the scenes editing to make it look this pretty. There was actually a lot more than that. But here's what we got. I've tagged all of my steps, step 0 through 26, as I made all the changes. I figure this is a nice in between actually live coding and breaking things and actually seeing the code change in real time. So where we are at step 0 is literally just view create application. This is what the Vue CLI gives you by default. There's literally nothing else changed. So I'm going to skip the running prettier on lit files because I disagree with double quotes. And we'll just go straight to step 1, which is, again, I'm going to skip through these first steps pretty quickly, but please feel free to stop me and ask a question if you want to. So on step 1, all I've done is remove the starter boilerplate that it gives you. the hello world information and giving it this stub out of an empty template file, say to-do list, which is pretty simple. Let me pull this up so you can see the changes here in real time. And this is just GitLens as a plugin for VS Code, which is amazing. And so you can see I've deleted Hello World View, deleted the logo.
Yeah, downloaded GitLens. Just do it.
GitLens is incredible. So here you see I've created this very simple template. It's just a component with plain HTML. And I removed the references, the old hello worlds, and shoved it in there. No magic happening yet. So on step 2, let's see, we've installed the to-MVC CSS and added some starter HTML, which again, just more boilerplate stuff. All I've done is run yarn add to CSS. You could copy and paste it if you want, but I just find it easier to pull it in this way. Add the CSS into main. And then all of this HTML just comes from the to-do MVC Git repo. This is their starter HTML, just literally copied and pasted it. That's it. Step 3 is where we finally start doing some real code. These first passes are all in standard Vue to plain JavaScript stuff. So here what we've done is this is going to be reading information. So you can see it. This is reading information in from a static data store that I've just put into local state. So you see down here, I've just created an array of to-dos, hard-coded in. I've set up some computed stuff to filter through them, and then I'm doing a simple iterate using v4 to show those dynamically. And there's some logic here to fulfill the requirements that to-do MVC is asked for. And you can see that. So that's pulling from now live data as opposed to the static one. You can tell it's live because it says to do 1 and 2 as opposed to what it said before. Again, I'm just going to keep plowing through these early stages real quick because there's not a whole lot of anything really fancy going on. But I still want you to see every step of the way. Step 4 is giving the add to do functionality. You should be able to type in here and put in whatever you want. It works. Show you what we did for there. So you can see we've just added some bindings to add an add to do function and a simple local state for new to do text to tie into. It's a very simple function. I'm just pushing on to the end of the array. Nothing magic there. I'm using this UUID library just because it's an easier way to get random strings generated other than trying to do it myself.
So you're creating the UID in front end.
Yeah, we're not doing any back-end stuff for this. This is as simple as we can get it. So we're no API calls or anything like that. This is just all on the front end.
Quick question.
Yeah.
When you call that function, would you rather like just pass in the parameter in the event binding, or would you just have it use like the internal state?
For what?
For the, I think it was the
text?
remove.
Yeah.
I think. So the way you the binding on the template, that you immediately pass the value right there in the template, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
you've
I'm passing
also
in.
done that in the function, right? So like, what was your thought process behind that?
The UUID value?
I think it was in the
Let's see. So here I'm passing in new to do text.
right on enter and add to do, right?
Yeah.
So you pass it in through the template.
Correct.
But you could have also just access that state.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I totally could.
So like, what was the reason?
I don't know. I built this real fast on a Saturday. I really didn't think about it.
If we're, like it's more pure, right?
I would, if I had to guess where my subconscious was going, that's probably it. Thinking through the testability, like if I want to go test add to do later, and I'm calling from local state, now I've got to build state first. Whereas if I've got this, this add to do function, and it's still referencing state directly inside of it, so it's not a huge win, but yeah, I didn't really think about it.
Right?
Sure, yeah, it's clear. That's exactly why I did that, 100%. I really didn't think about it. Honestly, it's a good question, though. And I don't know that there's a wrong way here. It's probably better to not couple it to state too much, but I mean, in a realistic app, this would probably be dispatching a call to an API or to Vuex store or something instead,
Right.
which would make a little more sense to have the text passed in, because nowadays it can be much more pure. They've got these side effect functions going away somewhere else. So. Let's go to step 5. I'll just leave that.
What are you using right here to jump between these steps?
So what I've done is I've tagged all the commits that I wanted in the different states to show the changes, and VS Code does that automatically.
So so it's just accessing it, and you're just jumping from tag to tag.
Correct. Yeah, down here in the bottom left-hand corner, VS Code tells you what commit you're on, or in this case, what tag you're on.
Oh, cool.
Then so I can just click it, and it's just a shortcut it gives me.
That's how it's coming out. Okay, cool.
Super handy for presentations, by the way.
I know.
Like,
I thought he just had like a key command, but I didn't
Yeah,
know.
right.
it's all magic. So here we're at step 5. What are we doing? Adding the ability to edit a to-do. So here we've just added a V model for, oops, sorry, that's the toggling. It ties in. This is just more, yeah, I'm gonna ignore that, it doesn't matter. It's just something that to-do MVC wants you to do. I'll show you what it does in a second. So we got a V model to map to the completed of the to-do. Then we call save to-do. I use save to-do for all of my saving state manipulations just because I found it made the code a little easier as opposed to having like a, like when I first passed this, I had an actual toggle to-do method and then a save to-do method, and I had another one for actually changing the state to make it editable. And it was just a lot of, it wasn't necessary. I found by just, if I accepted an object parameter and I do some like spread operators here, I can do everything with the same function, and it just felt cleaner to me. So like now when I go down, my save to do function is nice and clean because I'm just passing into the do and I'm writing over it whatever I need to. If I wouldn't change the state to editing, I just update it as part of the parameter that comes in, and it was it really cleaned up a lot of this code here. But yeah, so we were just finding the index and then using splice to overwrite that index of whatever to do you have to be editing. This is just a nicety so that when you go to edit to do, it focuses on the input. Let me show you. So when you double click, your carrot's already there waiting for you. Just
If you click in the middle, it would still go to the end or what?
yeah. So if I click anywhere, it's just going to. Yeah. And there's some other niceties on there to help reset the state defaults when you hit escape or lose focus or enter. Just again, nicety UX stuff to try and make the experience a little better. Any questions? Let's go to step 6.
Go back a little bit. Sorry.
Sure.
I have a question. I've never used this before. You have an app blur.
Yeah.
And that's
when an input or an item has focus and then loses it.
right. Okay. I didn't know you could actually tie that into Vue though. So you can do an app blur.
Yeah, now you do.
All of the listeners that are available.
Yeah.
Right. All
Yep.
the DOMs,
JavaScript,
right?
you can-
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, it's a nice one. Okay, we're gonna add some delete functionality. I promise we'll get to the fun stuff real quick. All right. I think this one was actually pretty short. Because all we had to do is add this remove to do method onto the remove button. There's a clear completed button that just overrides it piggybacks off the same type of information. I'll show you one thing I did there that might be a little different. Remove to do is simple. We find the index and you splice it out, just like we normally do. Clear completed. I did a shortcut where because I already have a computed property for only listing the active to-dos, I just overwrite the main to-do list with that as opposed to iterating a loop. It's a little more efficient. I should probably show you that functionality that we're doing it.
That seems potentially problematic.
Why is that?
To tell an array that it is a different array, I think in JavaScript will actually create a reference to the other array. So there may be some weird esoteric issues that you can get there by not like slicing it into being a new array.
Maybe. I want to say that most of that stuff is wrapped in Vue's reactivity anyways. And so I feel like when you replace it with another one, your concern is that the to-dos will be mapped back to, in my case, the active to-dos list.
Yeah, it may not make any difference in your current application.
Sure.
With your current logic, but yeah, in general, replacing an array with another array, I've like ended up with weird reference issues.
And that is a good point
I
because
think Vue 3 might solve those its entire system.
Right, you don't actually have that. We'll see some of that towards the end with the Vue 3 stuff too, how you don't actually have reference to the real value itself. It's all wrapped in a reference object. In this case, I might be okay. And I think I see where we're going, because each element inside of it for sure is going to be referenced differently. So if I swap it out, like I'm doing, I'll now have, and I edit something, like an element inside of it.
So I probably would have just wrapped it in an array and splatted it.
Okay, sure. And then you avoid that problem altogether. Yeah, it's a good idea. Oh, I was going to show you what it's actually doing. We have these active and completed links down here. So you list all the to-dos. There's your active to-dos. There's completed to-dos. And then we'll show that. When you click clear completed, it did delete it. It's gone. Refresh to recreate them. All right. Step 7. Step 7, I'm just arbitrarily pulling the to-do item out into its own component to kind of demonstrate some other things down the line. Which you'll see here. So here, all I've done is I've taken everything that was in this before loop and extracted it out into a component called to-do item. And then here's the to-do item, which is a lot of copying and pasting from the other one, which is really just a setup. You can see it still works. Everybody's happy. It's really just a setup for showing how you can mix and match Pug and TypeScript and even the composition API in a second.
Do you name your components? Like when I'm making new components, I always name them.
I don't ever use the name property.
Yeah.
Oh, the name property? I normally do. I don't know.
But I mean like DevTools, that just makes it easier.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to.
It does. I normally do. I don't know why I didn't here.
It allows you to import it as a different name and then use like it's the name that you gave it.
Yeah.
If you do name them.
Like especially if you don't.
If you don't, then however you import them,
You have like two options here.
you have two things that actually
Yeah.
Why didn't you just define
differentiate
for data versus just accepting like an object? What was your
Oh, why did I break all the props out separately as opposed to a single
right?
object
I
property?
gotta go pick up a family member.
Oh, sure.
I'll see y'all next time, and I'll message you just. That's up there.
Nice. It's good to see you, man.
Thank you for coming.
In general, I prefer to have them broken out to a certain point. I like it being more explicit about what the interactivity points on that component are. I kind of feel like my gut says after about 3, I would probably want to do an object as opposed to individual ones. My gut also says that if you need more than 3 or so props passed into your child component, it's probably doing too much. You've got that's a little too much interactivity in my opinion. I feel like you shouldn't need to give it that much.
What about state? Like, does it become a concern, right? Because now the child can mutate that reference to the parent object.
Yeah, don't do that.
Right. But
You,
can't ensure it, right?
you should never be mutating a prop.
when you're passing objects.
Yeah, and in fact, ideally you've got ESLint set up to yell at you when that happens.
Right, but in this case, like let's say you pass down to do,
Sure.
but then the child mutates a prop on the to-dos.
I think you get an error
You
message
those-
anyways when you do that.
You do.
Yeah, like you can't just do it randomly.
Yeah, it gets angry at you.
Yeah.
It
what
works.
it does when you're like, yes, but I think if you just access like a prop on the object, like it may not always pick it up.
Correct.
It may,
Yeah,
may
if you're
end up
doing,
with like no warnings. Because it's
you'll see that. Like here, let's take a look. 'Cause I'm actually doing that right here. Yeah, so like in here where I've got this V. Hi, Chris. Thank you. So yeah, just like you're saying, I've got the V model tied to to-do.text. So I am editing text directly on it.
right.
So it would directly affect the parent array that it's contributing back to. So you're right. You definitely could have some states that are on top of each other.
But in this case, it's small, right?
It's small. It's just for demonstration purposes only. But these are good questions. I know we kind of laugh at them, but it's a great question. It is something to keep in mind.
So for like best practices, what would you recommend?
I'd probably pass in a copy of that object.
Okay, like you could JSON, certified
Well,
cars or something.
It may
Get rid of the
like
reactivity.
in this case, I'd probably use a computed value of the array, which it actually is doing. In this case, it's using a computed value of an array. So So you're not directly manipulating the data source it came from in this particular instance, unless what you said is true in my view case, in which case, yes, sir, you totally are. So
I would pass a function from the parent to call from the child, so that the child calls the parent's function and updates the parent's state.
Right.
So, and then
which is what this guy is doing as well. So you can see how it's got the save to do functions here. That's passed in as a param right now, coming from the parent to do exactly what you just said.
But isn't that, like, aren't you guys, like, kind of going against the event sub model for Vue? Because why wouldn't you just submit an event for saving or forwarding? Because then you can track that.
That's I started to shake my head, but yes. Yeah, that is going kind of against this event subscription model. I don't like that paradigm, I guess.
Okay,
I don't know.
your own.
I didn't even know about it until last session here.
So
because you don't have any tracking of who's calling what function.
Right. So for me personally, I don't normally like to use vModel. It smells too much of two-way data binding from my Angular days. I got a lot of PTSD around it. So normally, like if we were going like here, where I'm getting a prop in, if I was going to try and like extract this a little better, like maybe in the create lifecycle hook, when I get the to-do prop, I map that to a local state version of that that's completely divorced from the other one.
Right.
And then I'm already passing in a copy of it upstream anyways, or I'm using the spread operator to say, hey, take my local state, but assume I have underbar to do, for example. That's how I would decouple it. And personally, I would not normally use vModel. I would use, I'd map it to the value, and then I would emit an event.
Right.
Yeah, either a change event like it's already doing right now, or that's the toggle. Like down here, I would, in this case, I'd get rid of the vModel, map it to the value, and then, I could just do that right now. I could just change that to only mapping to the value directly, and not even worry about vModel trying to write to the state itself. That would break, because it still needs to update this local state. That's how you can kind of get away from it. I prefer being a little more explicit generally. It is more boilerplate to type, but even in Vue, I've run into it a couple of times where vModel was updating things I wasn't consciously aware of. So breaking it out into actually admitting the change event itself, capturing that, doing what I wanted to, and passing it along.
Right.
I
Helped.
mean, that's technically what vModel is doing.
100%.
But you're just
100%. The vModel is syntactic sugar for that exact thing.
So vModel is evil. You heard it here first, guys, right?
Evil is a strong word.
I don't know.
I really am not sure if I have any usage in my project right now. Like
And you never noticed. You're not missing anything. So in step 8, all I did was install Pug, and we're just going to gloss that over and jump into actually doing stuff with Pug. On step 9, I'm converting the to-do item to Pug.
Does anyone know what Pug is?
Oh, that's a great question. Everybody not know what Pug is? So Pug is a templating language, kind of a shorthand for writing HTML. And you'll see an example of that right here. Look at that.
Technically, it has a lot of extra capabilities as well. But when you're using with Vue, you would never use any of its extra capabilities. So if you look at its documentation, just ignore most of it. And just, just accept the fact that you have really brief HTML.
And that's an excellent point.
And if you want to use it, you can always do template language. And same with like script as well. You can use script language.
Spoiler alerts. We're going to get there in a second.
Oh, sorry.
So here you can see the conversion of plain HTML over to Pug. So for the purposes of Vue, it's just a more concise way to write HTML. It kind of cleans it up a little bit. He's totally right that Pug can do a lot. It can handle loops in itself. It can handle its own interpolation and whatnot, but we're not using any of that in Vue. We're using it as a more concise markup language. Thank you. And it's pretty straightforward. Everything you see here kind of maps across one-to-one. If you're familiar with Emmet, it's basically like writing Emmet code. Are you familiar with Emmet? The expansion. Emmet's just like it's a plugin, but it's a library that lets you write shorthand and expand into code. So the shorthand for a class is .class name, for example. So in this case, where I had
You gotta
div,
get Emmett.
huh?
If you don't have Emmett, you gotta get Emmett.
You gotta get
Yeah,
it.
it's just amazing.
It saves you tons of keystrokes.
What's your current editor right now?
Oh,
You got it.
well,
You already have stuff
so,
in it, right?
yeah, it's already built in.
Yeah.
You already got it. So
You do the class expansion.
yeah. So the next time you edit in HTML, if you do .class name tab, it'll expand to say div class equals whatever. And that's
working with snippets.
yes. And so this Pug models Emmet pretty close. The syntax here with the open parentheses, everything inside of this is just how you pass attributes to a block. So you see here I had this double click, and all I've done is wrap that in parentheses to pass it in as an attribute. And it is white space sensitive, so it uses the indentation to tell where it is nested inside of the tree.
Used to be called Jade.
It used to be called Jade.
There are no more closing tags.
There's no more closing tags. It is nice and neat. One of the big benefits I noticed with Emmet later on, I go through a refactoring loop towards the end of this, and Emmet made that really nice. Pug made that really nice to use, because I didn't have to worry about tracking down and finding the closing tags. I was able to just grab a chunk, copy it, paste it somewhere else, and it was really, really nice, especially when it came to refactoring. You do lose the IntelliSense that VS Code gives you, which is kind of a bummer. But we were talking before we got here that it's not that much of a bummer, because you don't use it that much inside of HTML. And so then, and your component should be small enough that you don't need to, you shouldn't be jumping 300 lines down to find your local state. And if you're doing that, you need a smaller component. But yeah, so I just did this one, and the biggest thing here for breaking that doing one at a time is that you can see that it still works. So we have Pug being used to render these individual to-do items, but plain HTML is being used for everything else. And they play together really nice, because Vue is amazing.
Yeah.
And so step 10 is just doing the same thing with the to-do list. And I won't even show the difference. We'll just show you the after here. It's just a lot cleaner. Everything is cleaned out.
Do you have any
Still looks
specific
exactly the same.
plugins in VS Code that helps you write Pug? Is there a,
I don't. I just used it for the first time last weekend when I was putting this talk together.
I've never actually written Pug, so.
I thought you used Pug all the time. I thought you're the reason I started doing this.
No, it was the.
Oh, you're the one that did the Pug. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, thank you. It was very fun to play with.
Yeah. I mean, Viter like supports like the syntax coloring and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's really much else.
Yeah, you really don't. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. Again, skipping through 11 real quick, all I did here was update app. Do you also use Pug?
I mean, there's one other thing with Pug though, is that you do need to install it. You do need to run npm install for.
So if you're like Webpack and you see a lot, you need to configure anything on that, or do you just
No.
automatically?
No, all I did was install it. It was
Install
ready to
Pug
go.
and set lang plug on the template.
Vue is
100%.
just mash it. That's
100%. Yeah, well, I think it's making the assumption that you're storing, your node modules and node modules. And then once it's there, that's just where it's going to look. It makes the assumption that if you're giving me lang equals Pug, you install Pug. But it doesn't do it by default because it's more stuff for it to
It
do.
used to be a little more tricky, but yeah, as they continue to upgrade Vue Client,
Yeah,
it's just better and better.
it's incredible. This one was pretty fun though. I can actually shorthand this even more. If you put a colon here, you can put that into a single line of text. I just didn't think about it at the time. The colon is like the shortcut to say this is a block. Everything inside this goes inside that block.
You'll notice that he went to dash case on the right-hand side. That's not strictly necessary either.
It's true. I just prefer it. I don't know why I had the Hungarian case on the other side. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You can use the same casing over there. Right.
How dare you make your code 2 lines of code?
I know. What are you doing, man? All right, cool. So step 12, we're going to start adding TypeScript. Ooh. For no other reason, I've just never done it, and I wanted to see what it was like.
We all do TypeScript.
Yeah, anybody use TypeScript?
I don't
Awesome.
in Pug, but it just got off of an Angular project where I use it.
Okay.
And I'm considering adding it to, or sorry, I said I don't in Pug. I don't in Vue. I'm considering adding it to Vue.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Because there's better support.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
we
gonna be
can get to it. So I like TypeScript a lot. A lot of people don't. I'm not like a fanatic about it, but I do appreciate a lot of the IntelliSense that it gives you. I appreciate the static type checking. I think on smaller project, it makes a ton of sense.
There's a lot of people that don't know TypeScript. Can you just give a rundown?
Sure. So TypeScript is look at it like a superset for JavaScript. It's maintained by Microsoft. It's basically a wrapper for JavaScript. So it gives you static typing on JavaScript. So you can use it if you're more comfortable with any other type languages like Java or C# or whatever. Similar set of syntax. But it does compile down to JavaScript in the back end. One of the biggest complaints you get from people who don't like TypeScript is you spend a lot of time making the compiler happy. And that can be pretty frustrating. But I don't know, man. Every time the compiler's yelled at me, it's always pushed me into a better way of writing something. Normally when the compiler is upset because I did something dumb.
I mean, there are instances where it's just like, okay, cool. I was evaluating against an empty string or against 0 instead of against true or false, right? So it's like, oh, okay, I need to double knot it in order to convert it into a Boolean, an official Boolean, so that it actually like randomizes. Or because there's that sort of stuff all over the place. Right? Just based on the way that JavaScript behaves. Right. And then I'm just like, all right, you're being really pedantic, right?
Yeah. Or I think that the biggest frustration for me is if you're using a library that doesn't have the TypeScript types built yet. Yeah, exactly. Now you've got to go write your own, and that's going to be a pain. But let's move on. So all I've done here in this step is use Vue CLI's add TypeScript plugin, because there is a CLI plugin for it. So all the changes here were done for me mostly automatically. I did have to clean up a couple of things because I already had existing code, but like the CLI did this for me. The main changes you'll see is that once you switch over to TypeScript, you have to use this Vue.extend to wrap your exported object, but also TypeScript won't understand that it's a Vue component. So that's all that's doing. So I import Vue so that I can use it to make TypeScript happy. This one's fun because literally all it did was rename the file and everything else stayed exactly the same. You change it from .js to .ts. The shims is something it gives you automatically. We don't care. That's more the same. None of this matters. I honestly don't know, nor do I really care.
Shims basically
looks like it lets you use JSX.
Like type bindings or something that doesn't have it. Okay. So let's TypeScript know. Like,
so you ran Vue CLI after your project already existed,
right? And
told it to add TypeScript.
Yes, right. Literally, Vue add TypeScript.
Oh, really?
That's it.
Okay.
Did you do that for Plug as well? Do you add Plug?
There is not a plugin for Plug.
Oh, okay. Oh, so this is a Vue plugin.
There's a correct. Oh, okay. And it will overwrite your existing files. Like it overwrote app.vue in a way that broke it, so I did to clean it up. But we're talking.
So it modifies your code base.
It does.
Really?
It modifies.
So very slightly just to get that extent.
I believe so. Yeah, it's because it wants to import Vue for you and get the app working correctly. And there might be a parameter you can pass in when you add it to help them do that. A lot of them do have those functionalities. I just went for it, man. Yeah, give it to me. This is small. I don't care.
One component, right?
Exactly.
Basically, all of your JS files become TS files.
Exactly.
As well. It doesn't need to change a whole lot.
All right. So in step 13, I'm modifying the to-do item component over. There's an interim step here where I created an interface because I'm going to use that all over the place. This is part of the making TypeScript happy that upsets a lot of people. But this
is also the good part.
But it's the good part. This is the good part. So because I've typed my to-do, it's going to enforce that for me everywhere I use it. And this was actually pretty helpful when I was refactoring things later. So here, to make it TypeScript ready, you set lang to TS, import Vue, wrap the whole thing in Vue.extend as you do. Here I've imported my interface so that I can go down here and say this to-do is of type to-do. There's a little bit of goofiness here that I'll show for people who have not used TypeScript before. TypeScript is upset because this .refs is a union type in the type definition, which means it's an HTML element or it's undefined. And so if you just say this.refs.focus like I had, TypeScript will complain that this method does not exist on that type. People are like, oh, that sucks, it's an HTML element. That's why you have to explicitly cast it as an HTML element. Otherwise, TypeScript will yell at you that focus doesn't exist on undefined, because it doesn't. Yeah. Kind of irritating. I wish it would. I wish there was a flag to tell to be less obsessive about that. I feel like if focus exists on any of those, can you assume that's what I meant? But then again, that kind of gets away from strongly typing something. So, you know, they're probably right. I'm probably wrong. That's fine. And so this one was pretty simple. Do you have any questions about what's happening here? Wasn't a lot that had to change, which is nice. Let's move on.
It's worth noting that TypeScript is currently like the most adopted new paradigm. They're using an Angular, React, and Vue now. Even Evan Yu is coding Vue in TypeScript.
Yeah, Vue 3 is all TypeScript.
Right. Switch now is half the size and twice the
It's one of those things that, like, even if you dislike it, you're probably going to have to.
It's definitely worth learning. It's definitely worth learning. So here I'm refactoring to-do list into TypeScript. This will be a little more work, so we have a lot more going on here. So again, you just change your lang to TS, import Vue. There. Here you'll see that, well, actually don't see it here. One of the things I griped at as soon as I converted this over is that UUID, I didn't know what that was. So I had to install a UUID type definitions. Fortunately, there was one. You install it, and then as soon as you installed it, TypeScript by default looks for type definitions in node modules. If it finds one, you're golden. That's a little aside. Importing my to-do interface. And then down here is just a lot of making the compiler happy, explicitly declaring these guys as returning arrays of to-dos. Tell it that the text coming in is a string. All pretty simple.
The UUID is a NPM package?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's pretty configurable. I just use the default one, which is like I don't know, it's like 20 characters long, 4 blocks of something randomly generated, but you can feed it different hashes to change whatever you want it to be. I forget what the one it uses is called by default, but I always use it on these projects because I don't want to deal with implementing an ID myself or whatever. I just find it simpler. Let's see. We're on step 15. Oh, cool. Yeah, we're just moving right along. At step 15, we start getting into Vue 3 finally. So this step just says adding composition support.
We all know about Vue 3. So Vue 3, you can still use the regular API, but you also have composition API, which kind of streamlines it down together.
Yeah, we should be, like, this isn't real Vue 3. What they've done is they've extracted the composition API part of it to a library you can import into a Vue 2 project like this is, so that you can try it out. Like, Vue 3 as an actual thing is still being built, so you can't really use it. So we say Vue 3 for the clickbait, but it's not really Vue 3.
Gotcha. I was
Ah,
thinking about
hey,
show
good
some
times.
office stuff.
No.
I mean, you have one of your core members
I mean,
on your team.
I know. I do have a core member on my team. So here all I've
I
done
could get my full.
is I've installed the library, which is just using Yarn. I use Yarn or NPM to grab the composition API. The only setup you have to do is tell Vue to use it, and now it's available, but it's not required. So if you go and look at the actual application, oh, that's right. When you switch from JavaScript to TypeScript, you do have to restart the build server. That is the one hang up here. Build server, you have to rerun.
So
The
just give
Vue
you more
CLI
background
server.
on composition API. Instead of having
There we go.
methods,
We'll get there,
compute
Edward.
properties.
Edward,
all
we'll
that
get
stuff.
there.
I'm so excited. Can't wait for the release.
I know. I'm actually excited.
Just put a damn
It's
date
very
on
cool.
it.
So I did want to just show real quick that looking at TypeScript, everything is still working. Like, we still have our functionality, and we have the composition API added, but it's not required. You can mix and match them as you need to. So when you do something like this, where we're going to start actually refactoring to use it, it'll keep working. So we'll go to step 16. We're going to add the composition API to the to-do list. And at first, it kind of looks like just a lot of unnecessary boilerplate. But I hope as we get to the next step, you'll start to see like how powerful it can be when we start simplifying the code itself. Nothing really changes in here except that I found a couple of weird like typos where I had this in there. But it still worked, but it bothered me that it was there. So just clean that up. So here's what the new API looks like. So I'm dealing with my lag. And so again, this create component is only necessary if you're using TypeScript. All that function is doing is it's a wrapper to let TypeScript know everything inside of here is typed to the new composition API. In regular JavaScript, you would not use the create component function. It's just, it stays the exporting object like you did in Vue previously. And what we're doing is basically, I'm not going to go too much into how the composition API works itself. We're going to demonstrate what happened. Afterwards, we can go into details if people want to pick at it, because we'll be here all night if we try and stop it every step of the way. So just accept it as true, and we'll move on afterwards. You good, Edward? It's killing me. I want to explain.
How did you get that font in VS Code?
Oh, baby. It's so good. We'll deal with that later, too. That's Fira code. We'll talk about that after we talk. Those are ligatures. It's a ligature font. They're my faves. Okay, so what we've done is I'm mapping over everything in the object just straight one-to-one, making it fit the new composition API syntax. And basically what that means is you get to deal with the object as just a standard JavaScript object. So you have the setup function, and all of like your local state data just become variables inside of the function anymore. As you can see, instead of having the to-dos on this return data value, I'm just instantiating a constant of to-dos that is an array, is a reference to an array. This little reference call is the thing that helps Vue maintain its reactivity. And let's not get too hung up on it right now. And so I'm just taking everything from my local state, creating a variable for it, wrapping it in a reference call, and moving on. The computed values are now just plain functions wrapped in this computed method that's given to us by the composition API. And all your methods are now just standard functions, which is pretty cool. And so once I've mapped all these over, and it's just a lot of boilerplate we're going to ignore for right now, you have to go and expose it at the end here. This is what you're doing. At the end of the setup, at the end of that setup function, you return an object, which is everything you're going to use inside of the template. So if you touch this in your template, you need to return it here so that those values are available to your template. Down here, I'm just resetting my to-do item components, and I'm done. If we go back over to our application, again, you'll see it's still working as expected. Nothing's changed. Yeah.
Does the like the current version of that tool support the new composition plugin? Can you still debug that code?
I haven't tried.
Okay. I mean, it probably transpiles it, right?
Well, yeah, it's gonna interpret it as a regular component. So I'd be surprised if it didn't.
Right.
I would think so.
So, like, if you wrote like a new component for like a library with this plugin, do you think it can be shared?
It should be, yeah.
Supported?
It's still compiling down to the same thing.
Right. Render functions.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
It's just
So
a,
everything should work.
it should, yeah.
According to their write-up on what it was going to do, you should actually be able to use setup in the context of a normal Vue component as well.
Yes.
Once it's actually released. So yeah, definitely all gets compiled.
Yeah.
And definitely use it
Like,
next to everything.
Yeah, mix and match it in the same component.
Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy times.
The dev branch on DevTools has got nothing for the new. So I'm assuming it's, in the last two releases were minor point releases and they were both UX related. So I think it's going to be plug and play.
Right. It's nothing in the architecture has changed, right? It's just a plugin.
The reactivity is still there, which is kind of what brings you
Right.
there anyway.
Yeah, and that's their goal. Like one of their stated goals with Vue, one of the things that I like about it is they have a stated goal to make everything as backwards compatible as possible. That's part of the reason they released the composition API as a library. And I think they're going to keep supporting it after Vue 3's out. It's like when they finish it, like this will still be available, they'll make it production ready, so you can baby step your code into Vue 3 over time. I think that's the kind of, like dev community support you get from a library that is not funded by a company. Like this is what they do. That's pretty awesome. I'm gonna quit being a fanboy of that view for a second. And so for 17, we're getting into our first feature. The way that composition API kind of talks about things that you can break the code out by feature, and I really like this step. Oh, okay, I'm already on there because it kind of really highlights how that works in a neat way. So I've broken out all of my filter functionality into its own feature file. I was able to extract it. And why that's cool is that once you go down here and you see all those red lines, everything in red are things that are only used for, in this case, filtering the to-dos. And you kind of see how they're all spread out all over the place. That kind of sucks. And so one of the things I talk about the composition API was supposed to solve is that when you work on a feature, it's usually tied together. Like all this filtering stuff is tied together. When I was developing this originally, I had to go build these computed values and then go back up to my data store and write something for the do's, and then go down to my methods and do something else. So I was jumping around the file a lot. But if I'm able to extract it into its own feature, as you see, all this stuff just got straight deleted. And then I import this file. I should look over here when I'm scrolling. I import this use filter to-dos file that I created. And this is more or less a copy and paste of all of that information that I had into a nice, neat file that is feature focused on one thing. All this is doing is filtering to-dos. That's all it cares about. That's all it's going to do. And so now, when it comes time to maintaining that or adding any new features or whatever, they're nice and tightly contained. So it's able to extract that, filter to-do stuff into this file, and it's easy to work around. This is everything I need in the universe to make filters work.
It's almost like a mixin, right?
Yeah, it's a mixin without mixin's problem.
Exactly.
We'll let Edward talk about that after.
Yeah, and you don't have to extract this to a separate file either.
You don't.
It can just be a chunk above your.
The cool thing is
But
that
you should.
now you can bring parts
Look
in.
how pretty it is.
And part of what I like about Vue is the single file component. So if I'm not going to reuse one of these things, it may just be that I want to group it.
But it's
But we
cool
are
that you
gonna
can
reuse
bring in like all that view functionality
100%.
somewhere outside the view model, right? Yeah. Definitely like a lot more powerful.
So on step 18, I'm just doing the same thing, but now I went after the edit to-dos feature. So you can see when it catches up, all this stuff I was able to remove from the edit to-dos. And this file's just getting tighter and tighter. To me, like the to-do list, and your components should always have the one thing that it does, right? So these are my baby steps to getting down to a single responsibility. Excuse me, for each of these components. And I love deleting code. So we went from 129 lines of code down to 105. So we're making this to do this a little easier to reason about than it was before. And you can see how, as I extract them, you still have to expose them to the template. So here I'm spreading the return of those functions. It's just JavaScript at this point. These are just straightforward JavaScript controls. So like my use edit feature is pretty close to just being, well, I guess in this case, a TypeScript file.
Are they just functions in that file?
Yeah.
Essentially, you just require some state for operating with them, and that's it.
Yeah, but everything inside of here is all just JavaScript. You have this ref method you have to import to make it reactive with Vue, but outside of that, this is just straightforward JavaScript. This file by itself is now very easy to test.
Yeah.
But you don't need to pull them into Vue dev tools. You can do that straight in Jest without using anything else.
Right.
Stub out the ref file, so it just returns itself. Done. I love that. That makes me really excited because testing internals of a component is oftentimes a huge pain in the butt. I hate it. Here I can truly unit test these things and say, yes, an add to do pushes stuff onto this value that is already here. Let's see, so 19, oops. I'm going to add the toggle feature, which is pretty small and silly, but I'll let you see it real quick. Again, this is more of the same. Once I got into this flow, it really felt, this refactoring was very zen. It was kind of soothing. It was like, oh, I feel like I'm such a good developer because I'm moving so quickly and everything's working. But just, again, more deleting, more putting into a file, moving on.
So on that import, you use the add symbol in the new version.
What's that?
Import
Add
the
feature.
add feature. Sure. What is that? Is that like a TypeScript thing? Or?
No, that's actually default Vue. It actually goes to
It's built into the CLI. That's a
great.
Webpack
CLI.
alias. It's a Webpack alias.
Oh, okay.
And
That's
then-
fantastic. Is that like the source directory?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly correct.
So I'm not running on Vue CLI, so it's like a lot of little details that.
what?
Well, it's a big project.
It's a custom
You know,
setup,
This may come as a surprise, but GitLab is also not running off the CLI.
Right. Yes, it's a
Some
website.
project's so old that
Oh man, dude! One of these meetups, I explained to somebody how GitLab consumes Vue, and their eyes just got bigger and bigger. Is that you? But why would you do it that way? Well, because it's a 7-year-old project.
I mean,
Do what you got to do.
it sounded fine to me. I stuck it inside of a Java project.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Like Spring or something.
You
I was
guys.
just so happy that I could.
So with this one, what I've decided to do is I actually ran into an issue with, I don't remember what exactly, but you'll notice inside of here, I was passing in to-dos as an actual parameter. And that was a terrible idea. Don't do that. But to make it available, I decided to use the provided inject API, which is not a Vue 3 thing, but it did clean this up quite a bit. And so I'm making my to-dos available everywhere, and I don't have to pass them in here, and then I can use them directly instead of use to-dos. And that fixed the weirdo problem I was having. I don't remember off the top of my head it was. Apologies, I should have taken a note because I don't want anybody else to run into that.
With TypeScript, with the inject, I've had issues, especially with like meter, knowing that injected function
Came from.
or property, whatever exists, because it's defined as a string, right? It's
Yes.
Preparing,
Yes, it is.
like,
Yeah, you can define them as symbols and then export those, and it might tie together better, but I didn't have an issue with it. I cast them as the types here explicitly when I import them.
I see.
Did you get type hints for that, or was it like painful looking it up?
No, I mean,
Just to know what to cast it to.
it was kind of painful to figure it out the first time, but again, I haven't touched TypeScript in a while. So getting used again to, oh no, you got generics, I need to cast this as a to-do array instance of a ref type. And once it comes back to you eventually. TypeScript, those things are kind of hard to learn the first time. Once you get them, it's not that big a deal.
So prior to the composition API part, you
Yeah.
presumably just had inject colon either brackets or curly brackets with like with to-dos.
Well, he didn't have it.
No, I didn't have it injected. I just
Oh,
wanted to.
got it.
I added it at this step to kind of clean some stuff up because I was having a problem.
That's the case that I can't figure out. Is using, okay.
Oh,
So
I know why. I think I remembered why I added the reject here. It's because in the next step, I start to reuse some of the functions that we're using in the composition API, and they lose reactivity across each other. Because inside of each function itself is now its own instance, I believe is happening.
So how does inject know, like, I think I answered my question. Well, actually, yeah, well, it's a good question. Like, how
Sure.
do you know, how does that file know, like, where it's getting the inject from, right? And the answer is that he's spreading that file in that same view model, right?
So
So,
what was the question again? Sorry.
okay, so like in the use, edit, to use,
Yeah.
whenever you're using inject, right? You're not using in a child component, which is like the classical case for provide inject. So,
Sure.
like, how does Vue know, like, where to retrieve that to use, right?
So these strings,
Property.
they're unique IDs, or they're supposed to be. That's why if you look at the examples, they don't actually use strings directly. They use symbols everywhere, so that it's globally unique and available. I had a hard time getting TypeScript to accept it, and I'm very green with using symbols. So I gave up and said, screw it, I'm going to use strings directly. But they're unique keys. That's your answer.
But can you hop on to whenever you call provide?
Yeah.
To do this.
Is the root of the question that you're used to thinking of provide and inject as being a parent
Right.
model?
But really it's global, right? Is that how it works?
It still is still is parent and child, because these, if you look at it more like the used to do file, it's being imported into a component, and that component will have the context of this available.
But essentially, when you spread it, you're exporting, right? Just that single object,
I keep
right?
saying I'm spreading it. How am I spreading? What are you
There
talking
on the
about?
use filter to use.
Oh, right here?
Right.
Oh, this is,
The
yeah.
return value. So you're spreading those functions into the return object, which would be
Right.
like the view model itself, the to-do list, right?
Yeah, sure. And let's open these up side by side.
Yeah. That would be good.
Get out of the way, zoom. All right. So here's what you're talking about.
Right. So
And
you
it's
return-
spreading this.
Right. But then, like, it's almost as if you were writing this in the options API, it's almost as if you were using provide in the same component and using inject in the same component. Like,
Yeah,
would it
effectively,
know?
sure.
I guess it knows, right? If you use it in the same component, it grabs it, if you're at the parent level.
It's a great question. I've never done that.
Because essentially, I think that might be like what it's getting compiled down to, right?
It seems like it, yeah. Well,
similarly.
Right, I'm surprised
So-
it works.
I'm sure there's something more complicated than that because I'm actually importing the inject and provide methods from the new composition API. It's not just what Vue already has. So I'm sure there's some magic
Maybe it's
that
global
it's
or
doing.
something.
Might be.
But what was the problem that you were running into with losing reactivity?
So what I had was when I reused one of these feature files, and I was passing in the to-dos as a parameter. Once it got inside of that function, I believe what was happening was, because it's wrapped as a reference at that point, it's now, by reference I mean not JavaScript reference, I mean a ref as in the actual ref method I'm importing from the composition API, that wraps it in its own reference object. So now it's not looking at the same thing that was passed into it. And so they're no longer, these two separate components are no longer looking at the same version of to-dos. They're looking at
It's a
their
new
own.
proxy.
Exactly. So I needed to use provide and inject so they're referencing the same value.
I wonder if this is like issues that we're going to have with the Vue 2 version of it. If that sort of thing just might be present in Vue 3.
Maybe.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see. There's still a lot of stuff in flux. I mean, it's in alpha.
Yeah.
I mean, this RFC is still open. So they could be changing a lot of this going forward.
That's interesting, right? Because now you're getting state, but it feels almost as if it's global, right?
It is global. It's globally available, sure. You know, kind of like it's dependency injection. You're injecting this value. We good?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. These are great. They're great questions. And if something feels kind of weird, you think you could be done better, that RFC is still open. Jump in there and scream at them. They respond well to
They actually, like that one RFC that I mentioned that was afraid of last time,
Yeah.
they actually said we aren't doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Like I had
Oh,
this
yeah.
like big long post on it. And
Evan-
then Evan, you came in like a few months later, we were just like, yeah, nope,
All right.
nope, we're
I
closing
think just
this.
yesterday,
Cool.
Evan was kind of like mad at people because they were commenting on the old RFC. And I was on the thread, and he just kind of like, hey, like, stop, please. Like, you should know what, like, I don't want to read any more comments.
Yeah, we're not, everybody calm down.
Get it, guys.
We said we're sorry. We promised not to do it. Please quit yelling at me. So in this one, I've just started breaking out components into, breaking this smaller down. I'm trying to get to the single responsibility principle. Right now, to-do list is way overloaded, so I'm trying to break some of these things out. So the first one, I'm just going top to bottom as it makes sense to me at the time. So I grabbed this header component, and I pulled it out into its own component here, or header chunk of code to its own component. And let's see. So slow to respond. But I just copied and pasted it in the pug code, which was really easy to do because it's so nice and tight. I need to bring in my use to do feature because it does use some of the edit functionality. But now you can start to see where the composition API comes into place. Because I have the same functionality in multiple places. An alternative to this before would have been using mixins or wrapping things in slots and just been kind of gross. And here it's very simple. All I did was make it available, and it worked like magic.
And what does the setup function do?
The setup function is everything you need to put the composition pieces together.
Was it still in the to-do list? Did I miss that?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, it's in there.
It's wrapping the entirety.
Right. It's the function where you write all. It's essentially your component, right?
Right.
It's where you write the composition portion of the component.
Interesting.
So in the future, whenever you can mix and match, it's just going to be like being out right next to methods. And
Exactly.
Okay.
I'd be surprised if too many people do that long term. I would I would think most that would be like in a transition.
I'm definitely going to continue to use Vue's normal structure and only pull things out into this where it makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was originally meant to be like an advanced use case, right? Yeah.
I mean, everybody got angry.
That's what they're
when
saying
they
now,
said
and then
one
people are
point
angry.
At one point, they were like, "Yeah, this is just gonna be the way it's done." And people were like, "What? I like the structure."
So that one was bound to the use edit.
Never saw
Had like
it.
that new property there, right? That was bound in the template. That new to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was in.
It's inside that feature, correct? So now I'm extracting out the toggle version, which is just I'll show you where it went away from. This little toggle box, just breaking him out to his own thing because again I'm trying to get this down to where all it has to do is list to-dos. Should I get it as simple as I can? So
I'm not ultimately convinced that like making everything part of this composition thing is actually going to be easier to reason about, because as things like you may find that there are use cases where you have like computed values that multiple things need to share.
Sure.
And it may make more sense to just write the normal way for a lot of things.
And you get to, which is really cool. So you totally can do both.
So yeah, I don't think it makes sense to go like everything's going to be this because you're going to have overlap in some cases.
Sure.
You got to make choices based on what can you reason about easiest.
So
absolutely.
A question on the to-do list and the to-do header, we're both bound to the same property there.
What do you mean?
Like, so in the use edit you create a new ref, right? You create a new dynamic reactive property, data property. You set it to use, right?
Right.
So in that file,
let's see if I can pull them up from here.
Well, you move the markup down there, right? So the parent isn't using that property anymore, right?
The new text thing you're talking about? So you want the to-do header. You're talking about this guy?
Yeah, new to-do text, right? So right now, who's using that? Just the header?
Just the header, you're right.
Okay.
So
technically the parent can use it as well because it's consuming,
it could, but it wouldn't work because each instance of this new to-do text is going to be self-contained because it's wrapped in a ref. Like, see how this guy is being defaulted to this ref call?
Oh, I see. It's a function that you call and generates the new object.
Right.
So new reactive data.
So each template is going to have its own separate instance, which is what I ran into the issue with the to-dos already.
Yeah. It seems like if you made this like a singleton object, you would run into that issue where whenever you're importing it, like if you're binding data to the same reactive property.
Right.
Yeah.
And now in this instance, that's probably fine because it is in this particular case, it's by nature only used to create a brand new to-do, so it shouldn't be shared across.
Right.
So if I had, say, some goofy interface where I could create a new to-do here, or I want to create a to-do up here at the top, or maybe I want to create a modal because I like modals. And I can reshare that same functionality, type in all three of them, and all three of them would have to be different to-dos, which you would probably actually want. You wouldn't want to type in the header and see something in the list also up there. That'd be kind of goofy.
Yeah.
In this case, because they're not supposed to be the same. But again, I should have said the caveat early on, none of this is meant to be best practices. This is me playing with stuff and demonstrating it so we can have these kinds of conversations. Please don't take this and build an app this way.
Yeah, I'll rewrite our code base.
Yeah, 100%. There's actually giant text on the composition API library that says, do not use this in production. Flux, so you can play with it like we're doing
put a
right
comment
now.
with your name on it, just like
Justin said I could use this. And now all my code is broken, and it's your fault, and I hate you.
We're gonna give you weird looks tomorrow.
So yeah, just again, all these steps here are just me breaking out components farther and farther down, so until they're more tightly contained. And it's mostly, again, I kind of got into this rhythm here where it's all the same stuff. I delete a bunch of stuff from to-do list, and then you add it into its own component. Get rid of the footer, easy. And as I was finding is that as I got rid of more and more of this stuff, I needed less and less things inside of the to-do list itself. So each of the components were getting smaller and tighter as I went along, which is pretty cool. Let's discover what happened here. We're almost done. We want to wrap this up so we can actually talk and enjoy the talking. This one was super fun. This is literally just HTML. Get it out of there. Some of the TypeScript irritation. In my file list here, you'll see that TypeScript is really unhappy about that app footer. Once it catches up its indexing right now, one of these turns red because it's not a module, because I'm not exporting anything in that file. And so Vue's totally okay with it. That's perfectly fine. But TypeScript says you need to export something. TypeScript, leave me alone. You can export a template all by itself. It doesn't have to have everything
Did
else.
you also have to like install TSLint, or did the plugin take care of that?
VS Code has really good TypeScript support out of the
I
box.
think they integrated it, right? TSLint.
Yeah.
TS-Lint is actually
And they're phasing it out for ESLint.
Oh,
But
I didn't know that.
it still hasn't made it, though, I think, for ESLint, right?
Hmm?
It still hasn't made it into ESLint yet, right?
Um,
That's the plan.
There's an ESLint plugin that will handle a lot of it.
ESLint,
It's not like as fully featured as TS-Lint was.
Mm.
But on my last project, we moved over to ESLint. It worked for the most part. A couple of caveats of things that it couldn't figure out. It was like if you were attempting to type items in an array, it would never yell at you. Like they had to do their own like constants with the ESLint approach that we took.
So this one was kind of fun. As I was going through, and I noticed that I was able to get rid of this feature completely because once I had refactored everything else out, there's no editing happening on the list. So I was able to get rid of these properties. The new item doesn't need them anymore because those are contained inside the feature itself. I was able to just straight delete code from this file. That's pretty cool. And then the very last step is just a bunch of code cleanup, which you can see if you want, where I try to get into more of a, again, single responsibility idea. So the to-do list is truly just looking at the list. And I was able to get rid of all kinds of stuff because now it's a consumer, not a creator of information. So all of this goes away. Of course, the bad news is it's got to go somewhere, so it just moved up to app.vue. Yeah, it's still there. But that's it. That's the end of our journey. Mostly towards the end, there's just a lot of like, it was kind of neat to me to see how they became kind of like little Lego blocks in there. I was able to plug this in here and just use it right away. And you're absolutely right. It could totally be abused. None of this means that you're going to write great code every time. That never is the case. It's just another tool in your arsenal to use it where it makes sense. I do really like the idea of coupling, of putting features into one thing, though. That made a lot of sense because I've struggled with that a lot, especially on a larger component where I've got searching is the big one they use in their examples. So I've got this search thing I use all over the place, and I've got a search box up here in the HTML, and then I've got a dive down here, and I've got this filter, and I've got this demounts thing, and all this crap, and it's just, they're all over the place. I've got two computed values, I've got local state, I've got several different methods, and they're scattered throughout the component. It's just kind of a pain in the butt to look at. But it is just a search feature. Put all that stuff together. It's nice.
I'm really interested to find out if I can even figure out what belongs to what feature in some of my components.
Yeah. Naming is going to be crucial.
It's really powerful, but you have to be disciplined about it, right?
100%. Yeah.
Even though you have to skip into parts of the file, right? It gives you that structure, so you have something to skip. You know where to go.
Sure.
Because some people go like this all over the place, right?
And I think that's going to be one of those things. I think the first year is going to be pretty rough.
Yeah.
Once people get their hands on it, you will discover best practices over time. Like in Natalia's talk that I went to, already I saw the way she structured her features was way better than mine. That's awesome. But they use the verb use as to use a feature. So she created a use directory, threw everything in there, and so then she's linked to this. Use this one. I just liked it a lot. Man, that's way better than what I was doing.
And we're getting like really close to React now, right? Like the crowd. I mean, it seems like there'd be an even bigger overlap, maybe like a bigger.
Perhaps there's a
With like React hooks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because you're already familiar with that. It's kind of like the same, but
Yeah.
without your component update or something.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities. Absolutely. Yeah. And now we have time for questions. Oh, quiet.
That's a ton of questions.
That's true.
Doing
That's
that.
true.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I can make an app where all you do is just delete code. Like, how satisfying that would be.
That's so good.
Just forget
I
read
love
dummy
it.
code.
I love deleting code.
It's like a game.
Right? Yes.
It's like what?
Code deleter, the game. just break the game over time.
That's
It
great.
gets harder and harder to leak code because you just spread parts of the game itself.
That's amazing.
The ultimate cheat code is command A.
-RF done. It's done. It's great. All my code, but no, I love deleting code. I subscribe pretty hard to the concept of there's no such thing as good code. All code is bad code. The second you wrote it, it was bad.
So like, when you were preparing this talk, like what's like the biggest step or like what felt like the most painful to you in between, adding Pug, adding TypeScript, adding the new plugin,
TypeScript, 100%.
TypeScript,
100%.
for sure.
Yeah, I think that's what people hate.
Yeah.
TypeScript has a steep learning curve, and it's not.
It's not even a learning curve, right?
Well,
it's a tooling.
Yeah,
Mostly,
it
right?
is.
I mean, because there's a lot. Well, I mean, if you've never seen the concept of a generic before, and you don't know what it is, so you go, well, cool, I'm going to type this as a ref. What the hell are those angle brackets? What does that mean?
Right.
Now you've got a whole thing to go learn. Blissfully, I'd already gone through this nonsense years ago, and so I had some cobwebs to shake off. Oh yeah. But even then, you've got to get the syntax just right. Sometimes it feels like an incantation. You're like, it works. Don't touch it again.
It can get really ugly, right? I mean, depending on what you're working.
It's
like
especially
Java
rough if you're trying to look at Microsoft's documentation and make heads or tails of it.
Oh sure.
And if you don't have examples of what does it look like to cast a type on a method,
Right.
if you're just starting from nothing,
Yeah.
you have no fucking idea what you're supposed to
And
do.
there aren't that many starters that are really fast to get up to speed. Because JavaScript is just so fast for you to get up to it. You feel productive in seconds, minutes, right?
Like this.
TypeScript kind of hangs and moves around there a little bit.
A little
If
bit.
you're not familiar with it.
This stuff right here, the hard casting it as this one. This is rough. If you've never seen this before, and
So
you inject to-dos, and TypeScript is like, the hell's a to-do?
Right.
That doesn't mean anything. You can't do anything with to-dos because this is actually a good example. So inject gives me this value. So I do to-dos equals inject, semicolon. Then I go down here to do to-dos dot value, fail. Value doesn't exist on object undefined. Well, God damn it. What do you mean? Or the filter, you don't have a filter available because it doesn't know that value is actually an array. So this is a fun one because I've actually got, I say, cool, this is a ref. But I lose all this extra information if I don't have the knowledge ahead of time to know that I need to give it a generic type of an array of to-dos. And trying to find the right Google foo to search for to get there is pretty rough. So TypeScript by itself is okay. TypeScript plus other libraries sucks. And so having TypeScript and trying to navigate the composition API stuff and be and I have no examples like you're saying. There's no example online yet of doing composition API with TypeScript. I should do that. I'll do a quick Medium post with that. I haven't seen anybody do it. They tell you that, you need to wrap it in this create component, and then they leave you there. That's all you have to do. Liar. You can do all kinds of stuff.
So where did you mentioned that you got the type bindings for one of your libraries.
Yeah,
Where did you get them? Where did you get those?
Blissfully, most of the bigger libraries are pretty well supported.
Oh, out of the box.
Out of the box. So UUID is big. I just randomly tried yarn add at types/UUID is the default for all of the
you just try it.
It works 95% of the time.
It totally worked. Slash gave me a virus. But really, that was it. And you can search for it. I was pretty confident with UUID because it's a huge library. It's used all over the place. All the bigger ones have got pretty good type support, and that is the default nomenclature is at types /
Is that from definitely type or something?
Yeah. What the library formerly known as. And also, at types, that namespace is protected.
Right.
You can't, not just anybody.
They own that namespace.
Exactly. So doing that and getting it wrong is just going to come back with that doesn't exist. In real life, though, you can just search for library types, type definitions. And
Before I learned TypeScript, I attempted to upgrade Vue to TypeScript, but I didn't know about the Vue climb method of doing it. And I gave up.
Oh, wow. Well, now you know.
Vue
add TypeScript.
Did you ever get
any of this story?
Have any of you ever used the slow cousin of the TypeScript precision support, which was like the class-based API for TypeScript, the plugin for Vue 2.0.
The what?
Yeah, no one talks about it. Like, it's like,
The slow
they
cousin?
swept it under the rug. Yeah, because nobody
Pretend
liked
this
it.
didn't happen?
Yeah,
I have no idea what you're talking about. It's
yeah.
incredible.
They had like, they were planning on Vue 2.0 to bring in like something like kind of like Angular style or maybe React style classes.
Okay.
So you would, instead of writing it as an options API.
Oh yeah, no, it
Right,
still
classes.
exists. I played with it.
That's
Right. They
actually,
advanced it.
that's what I started
Like,
looking. Yeah, that's what I gave up. I was like, this is awful. I love
Yeah.
my object API for
Right.
Vue. I don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
And they still have the
And
same
you had that
problem.
like actually
I think.
write a constructor and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
and
Yeah.
that's still available. You can still
Yeah,
use
Still
it.
is.
But yeah, they sort of said there's no support for this in Vue 3.
Right.
This is garbage and nobody uses it.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad,
Yeah, no one's
Anytime I
terrible.
write a word class, I'm just like, this is going to be
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
Because it's not even a real class.
Yeah, so the first time, the first time I did this sample dummy project just real fast to see if it would work, I started with the class thing, just like you did,
Oh yeah.
and converted TypeScript, and it was a nightmare. I hate it. I got it to work. It was talking like a hello world app. It was awful. I was like, I hate this. I'm just going to use Vue.extend and you're done. Oh, great, done. That's all I'm doing. Right. The TypeScript picks up on everything. Yeah, do yourself a massive favor. Don't use that.
Right. It even looked kind of like Angular, right? The way you write it. You know, it's like.
Yeah, why would you do that on purpose?
Yeah.
A lot of Angular shade.
Word of the night.
So,
Still not.
fun fact, I submitted an update to, we have these questions when we interview people that they have to answer. Then I submitted an update to change the questions or wording, because I think they're too generic. And one of the things we ask is, give us your experience with popular front-end, with JavaScript frameworks.
Oh, yeah.
And I tweaked it to be a little more explicit. A lot of people just coming to me and like, yeah, man, I use React, it rules because it's easy. Like that's not really an answer. I need more. But I feel like we need to guide them a little bit more to tell them, really give me some examples of what you've done. But my shade at Angular was, I wrote it, I said, give us some examples of popular JavaScript framework like Vue or React, etc. I have a lot of PTSD. Angular hurt me.
So the one good thing that I will say about Angular is when I went to go learn Swift,
Okay.
I was like, I'm glad Angular like started making me aware of these concepts.
Okay.
Like it really seems a lot more like what app development or like hardcore backend stuff
Yeah.
is.
Well, yeah.
Like it lives in that area. I'm used to the paradigm of like, fuck it, I'm gonna use Pug because it's the fastest thing.
Yeah.
You know, like, and then I'm gonna use Sass without brackets and semicolons because I care about having less code.
Fair.
You know, so like I'm all over
So-
this world, and then there's just like
I will say,
crazy like
I felt like using Angular, and when we say Angular, we mean Angular 2+, right? Not Angular.js. So but the first and few times I ever used Angular, I did get that feeling, but it didn't feel good. I felt like I'm actually writing a lab code while I'm doing this. Like this feels like real programming.
Yeah,
I used to do .NET, and I hated it. I don't want to do that again. Why are you .NETifying my JavaScript
I
library?
don't entirely like the fact that they're turning something that could be so fast and so like lean into this big behemoth.
It was terrible.
And like I just finished my Angular project. I'm actually on vacation now.
Woo!
And I'm
We're really special.
I'm
He's like,
still like,
I'm doing
if I were to put this in my portfolio, it'd still be like, I'm a 2 out of 5 on Angular. Yeah, I'm not good at it
It's the
at all.
API surface so
I was on that project for like 3 or 4 months.
Holy cow.
I'm still like, nah, I think I suck at this.
Yeah. Yeah, I hated it. Yeah, when I interviewed for Proof, when I first started working here, I had a take-home project for Proof in Vue, and I had a take-home project for another company in town in Angular. And I did both of them on the same day. Proofs took me about 45 minutes, and I thought I did something wrong because it was so easy. But it wasn't. It's because Vue is amazing. My Angular project took me like 5 hours. It was awful. And the Proof one was harder technically.
Oh yeah.
Most of the Angular one was just
Bigger
like
picture.
God damn it, why do I have to look up every single stat? I can't, like, type. What?
Everything's a decorator.
Jesus. Yeah, everything's a decorator. It wasn't for me. And I don't want to say that Angular is garbage. I say that, like, hyperbolically because that's how I speak. But I don't think that it is. But it wasn't for me. I think the right person would really take to it.
It has its use cases, right?
It certainly does.
I think in the front end, like it's always been kind of like the Wild West of software development, right? So it's like you take a cowboy and you put it in an office chair or something. Like it's not gonna work for a while.
Justin was talking
That's how
about
people
those
Austin
surveys.
Vue.js.
The most recent one that I saw, showed like about
Through
the same
the
number
hallway
of
to your
people
right.
using like Angular and React, but it also asked like, would you ever use this again?
Oh yeah, I saw.
Did you enjoy using it? Angular is like
was
so low, like less than half the people that have used it ever want to touch it again. And Vue, meanwhile, is over here going like, I'm interested, but haven't done it.
Right.
I've done it, and would totally do it again.
Yeah.
I have a
Very,
question
very high.
Yeah, please.
on this. If you could redo it, what would you change?
I'd like to try it without TypeScript, honestly. I don't feel like it added a whole lot to this project. That's not a big change, though. That's not really the answer you're looking for.
I mean, it's an answer.
It is.
I don't know. It's such a small
What
project.
was your biggest thing? Because this is your first time using the Vue CLI 3.0, or not CLI, but Vue 3.0 composition, right?
Yeah.
So what is your biggest takeaway from it? Because I've yet to play with 3.0.
So-
I really want to because it looks awesome.
I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the boilerplate they make you do.
Okay.
Like, I understand why it's there. Like this whole ref concept, which I'm not using here. Like just wrapping your primitives in the ref value so you don't have to react to it with like this to-dos, that value.
I remember seeing that in some of the talks about 3.0. You think that's like maybe a crossover thing, or is that a?
What do you mean?
Like I've seen like a couple like you and a couple other people talk about 3.0, and I don't see any like the reference.
So
stuff,
there's two different syntaxes you can use. You have this ref one, right?
Okay.
I don't have anything wrapped in refs here.
Maybe I only saw the other syntax.
You may have seen the reactive syntax.
Yeah, probably. I'm sorry.
There we go. So we have this guy wrapped in a ref. So there's another way you could expose. Oh, zoom! I swear to God.
I know, right?
Every time you get close to the top, it's like, did you want to mute somebody? No. I'm trying to hit my tab, man. Go away. All right. So here, like for example, we have. Okay, so like I have this guy wrapped as a ref, for example. It's not going to make a lot of sense in this context. I only have the one, but the alternative syntax is reactive. And so the exact same thing here would be, I think it's, let's do text equals, I think it's this. Yeah, and then you pass in. How does this work? Sorry, I didn't use this one at all, as you can tell. But it's
fine.
along these lines, something like that.
So it almost feels like, has anyone here used like an older library like Knockout.js or something?
Very briefly, I used Backbone.
Backbone. It feels a lot like that, where now you can just, like, the reactivity system is at the palm of your hands, right? So you can decide when you create your reactives, and then you just have a template that you bind it to. So it's almost like a step back on that.
So I'm reading.
When they first came out with this like composition API, one of the things that they mentioned is that the reason why they did this with like forcing you to call functions to hook into the reactivity system was specifically for TypeScript support.
Right, yeah, that's a big point. Yep. Solid point for it.
Okay, this helps. So yeah, when you follow that syntax, now I don't have to use the value. See how it's complaining at me, but it's because it's recognizing this as an actual string now. Right. So you can shorten a little bit. And like in Natalia's talk, she uses the reactive syntax, but she also has like 4 or 5 values she's doing at the same time. And they don't have any guidance yet for what's best there. Again, nobody's using it yet. It's kind of a gut feel. The refs felt better to me. It was the first thing I read up on, and it felt right in this context. In this case, where I only have the one value, I would probably still do it that way. But
that notion of needing to like unwrap your, your things in order to use them is something that Swift has as well.
Oh, really?
It's really weird. Yeah. You access them with like raw value in Swift. But yeah, it's like totally these weird foreign concepts coming to us from other languages. You were also gonna talk about Fira code.
Oh, yeah, the ligatures. Oh my gosh. Oh, yeah. I don't know that I can help you out a lot there because I did this a long time ago.
There's a setting that you have to set in VS Code.
There's a couple.
To enable ligatures, and then you can download Fira code from Git. It's an open source.
Fira code, F-I-R-A. It's a font.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which is what gives you these fancy ligatures.
Why did you do this?
Because it's pretty.
if you
Also,
type like triple equals.
Right here.
You know,
I took it.
And you have to do stuff like, or like,
double, can you just
you see, it's just like perhaps a slightly more readable syntax. I did it because it's pretty. I'm not gonna lie. I did it entirely because it was pretty.
I think it's really helpful. Like I mean, I honestly like don't even notice it anymore. It just says what code looks like to me.
Right. But I mean, it is kind of helpful with like all of your like sort of looking for like return and.
I don't have that part.
Don't.
All the stuff that's in Lobster. Yeah.
Those are all the what's what I'm looking for. The reserved keywords in the language get called out explicitly, which is kind of nice. I mean,
I just don't like that. I see the value on it. It's kind of cool.
Well, I can ignore it. Like it doesn't.
You can change
I don't even.
right?
You could. You can opt out of that completely. You don't have to use that.
Right. So it's a plugin for VS Code.
It's a setting to enable ligatures, and then you download the font and you tell VS Code to use that font
For specific languages and reserved keywords.
Yeah, and there's a couple like there's one called like Nerd Font. I think it's pretty popular. I use this one because it has built-in stuff for. Like it gives me all these nice things up here, and it's got like little dingbats to use for like when you update things in Git. It's just cute.
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
nice
I saw somebody give me a talk with it. I was like, man, that rules, and I want that. It looks cool. I feel like an elite hacker or something. It's very, very shallow reason. Very shallow.
Yeah, very nice hacker using Lobster.
Right? Yeah. 100%. It's the same exactly.
And hard.
It's the same reason I have like the goofy like neon. Well, I started with the neon thing because I thought it looked cool to have like the Blade Runner stuff. But then I found it was really easy to read. So just kept it.
Check it out. I mean, it looks like more support.
I don't even remember what team that is anymore.
Oh yeah, I used to use Lord, and it's like it's pretty subtle, but it's quite nice. I've been using something like this, but it's like really intense. Like the colors were synth wave.
It is a bit garish.
Easy, but in the future type of form. You know, it felt like it was a criminal or something. But like my eyes, going for